Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be lifted and that I be allowed to speak for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the United States Senate has an opportunity to pass a multi-year transportation bill that ensures critical transportation projects move forward without disruption. As part of this bipartisan bill, the DRIVE Act, we also have an opportunity to pass necessary policy changes that enhance safety and make our transportation system work better. Part of the DRIVE Act includes important work on transportation policy we've undertaken at the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and we will lose an opportunity to pass bipartisan reforms if we don't approve this critical legislation. The last time that we passed a multi-year transportation bill into law was 2012. However, since 2009, we have passed 33 short-term extensions to avoid a funding gap that would stop much-needed transportation projects. Highway and transportation infrastructure projects, and in many urban areas, public transit projects are important to our constituents and our nation's economy. And if we continue to do short-term extensions, again, literally 33 short-term extensions since 2009, that is a terrible way to run a highway program. It doesn't allow state departments of transportation to plan. It doesn't allow those who are involved in construction, the contractors who build our roads and bridges, an opportunity to plan. It creates all kinds of uncertainty out there. We need the certainty that comes with a long-term highway program instead of having these 33 short-term extensions. And so this is a unique opportunity that we have to actually put in place policy that would guide us at least for the next 3 years and hopefully beyond. Mr. President, our transportation system is one of our government's most visible assets. And our constituents who sent us here notice when there's a problem with it. But federal infrastructure investments that Senator Inhofe and Senator Boxer take the lead on the Committee on Environment and Public Works, and transit projects, which the Banking Committee is responsible for, aren't the only critical parts of our transportation system. Policy decisions advance safety initiatives, and we have rules governing how, when, and where we build critical projects, as well as oversight of various regulations at the U.S. Department of Transportation regarding trucking, freight rail, passenger rail, and automobile safety requirements. These areas are the exclusive jurisdiction of the Senate Commerce Committee. I have the honor of chairing the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and was pleased to see my friend from Florida, Senator Nelson, who is the ranking member of our committee, return last night following his surgery last week to help advance consideration of the DRIVE Act. Now, let's talk about some of the policies that I've worked on with colleagues on both sides of the aisle that won't become law if we fail to move forward with this bill. Now, keep in mind, Senators Wicker and Booker are the authors of the rail safety bill that the Commerce Committee passed by voice vote last month, and their bill is included in this legislation. Let's also recognize that commuter rail systems, including New Jersey Transit and Virginia Railway Express, have stated that they will not meet federal deadlines for implementing positive train control technology. This legislation currently before the Senate would authorize grants and prioritize loan applications to help commuter railroads deploy this new technology to help address safety issues and to get positive train control up and running as soon as possible. The bill also includes numerous additional rail safety requirements, including the implementation of necessary automatic train control modifications and crew communication improvements to improve operations when positive train control and while positive train control is being implemented. The National Transportation Safety Board recommended requiring inward-facing cameras on all passenger railroads to create more accountability. This bill requires all passenger railroads to install such equipment in their locomotives. In fact, I have a letter here from the National Transportation Safety Board, the chairman, Christopher Hart, in which he says, "I applaud the recent passage of the passenger rail safety bill. I was pleased to see the inclusion of our recommendations regarding inward and outward-facing audio and image recorders. Thank you for your ongoing support of the NTSB." That is from the National Transportation Safety Board Chairman, Mr. Christopher Hart. And so having these necessary improvements will make our passenger rail systems much safer as they travel across the country. The bill also streamlines the permitting process for improvements to existing railroad track and infrastructure and improves multimodal planning and permitting. The Secretary of Transportation will have new authority to speed up projects and to reduce paperwork burdens. Outside of improving rail safety, we include a proposal offered in his amendment during committee markup by Senator McCaskill to ban rental car companies from renting vehicles needing recall repair work. We also include several provisions to increase consumer awareness of recalls, increase corporate responsibility, and improve highway safety efforts in all the states. Following a harsh Inspector General report criticizing the federal government's auto safety regulator, this bill requires the full implementation of reforms outlined in that report. Once these reforms are implemented, the agency's funding authorization will substantially increase to meet the Grow America request for vehicle safety efforts. These are important safety provisions in this bill. They make our roads and our transportation systems safer, and they deserve our support. At the committee level, some provisions of our title were the subject of constructive discussions that helped us improve this bill before it made its way to the floor. Here are a few things that we did to broaden support for this proposal after our committee passed the bill last week. Senator Manchin raised concerns about a provision I authored that requires additional testing for a new train braking requirement known as ECP that will be required under law by 2021 and 2023. I worked with Senator Manchin, and we came to an agreement that if new real-world tests show the requirement isn't effective, it can't proceed. If it is effective, there will be no delay in its implementation, and there will be no need for new rulemaking. We worked with Mothers Against Drunk Driving on another important issue to combat drunk driving. When we heard that they had concerns with our 24/7 sobriety program grant language, we worked with them to address those concerns and ensure that the dedicated grant program for states with ignition interlock laws continues. A pilot program our bill proposed that would allow licensed truck drivers between the ages of 18 and 21 to cross short distances outside the borders of their home states now requires not only the approval of participating states, but also the approval of the Secretary of Transportation. At the Commerce Committee, we have worked on a bipartisan basis to change, drop, or add provisions since we marked up the bill to earn the support of colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Now, there are still some differences. I expect amendments where this body will have the opportunity to decide important issues that we've debated throughout the committee process. One such issue, which I have heard a variety of opinions about, concerns the current $35 million cap on fines that the Department of Transportation can assess on manufacturers for auto safety violations. This bill would double the cap to $70 million, provided that the department first finishes a still undone rulemaking process on penalty assessment factors that was required in our last highway bill. Now, I've heard arguments that this cap on fines for auto safety failures should be raised even more, or even set at an unlimited amount. Well, we are doubling this cap to $70 million and conditioning an additional increased authorization for vehicle safety on implementing needed reforms. Mr. President, this bill enhances safety. If we do not pass this bill, auto safety regulators don't get more funding as called for by Secretary Fox and various safety groups following the record 64 million automobile recalls that we've witnessed over the past 2 years. Penalties for industry auto safety violations won't go up if this bill doesn't pass. Commuter railroads don't get the new assistance to help implement positive train control or other critically important safety improvements that the NTSB, Amtrak, the FRA, and others have called for. None of that stuff happens if this bill doesn't pass. Rental car companies don't face a federal ban on renting vehicles that are subject to open recalls if this bill doesn't pass. Mr. President, not passing the safety reforms in the DRIVE Act would be an incredible missed opportunity for addressing a host of key safety improvements. Now, some believe in this building it would be easier if we just passed another short-term extension. They're right. It would be much easier. But keeping highway and related transportation infrastructure projects funded for a few more months doesn't address safety and regulatory issues that we cannot afford to keep ignoring. 5 months from now, if tax reform leaves us with new options, we can always decide to infuse additional funding into the bill before the Senate. But delaying action on transportation for 5 months could also compound our difficulties. Remember, there have already been 33 short-term extensions passed by Congress since 2009. A silent part of every argument for a short-term extension is, let's not address safety and other critical transportation needs. The right decision for the American people is to seize the opportunity to pass a bipartisan multi-year transportation bill without delay. And Mr. President, I'd like to share with you just some of the letters of support that we've received from various organizations who have looked at the body of work that's included in these particular provisions that I've mentioned. This is from the Governor's Highway Safety Association. It says the Governor's Highway Safety Association congratulates the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee on releasing S-1732. This 6-year reauthorization bill will provide needed stability and consistency for state highway safety agencies to reduce the number of crashes, injuries, and fatalities on America's roads. This is from the American Public Transportation Association. It says, on behalf of the American Public Transportation Association, or APTA, our 1,500 member agencies and the millions of Americans that depend on public transportation, I write to commend the committee's hard work to advance comprehensive rail legislation that attempts to address safety, funding needs, Amtrak enhancements, improved project delivery, and other important rail policy issues. We fully support the inclusion of a rail title within a broader surface transportation authorization package considered in the Senate. That from the President and the CEO of the American Public Transportation Association. This is from the National Association of Railroad Passengers. They write, we're writing to endorse the inclusion of the Railroad Reform, Enhancement, and Efficiency Act into the Comprehensive Transportation and Consumer Protection Act of 2015. The move to include passenger rail authorizing language in a broader highway and transit bill is an important step in recognizing the critical role that intercity trains play in a national transportation system. This letter is from the States for Passenger Rail Coalition. On behalf of the States Passenger Rail Coalition, I write in support of the actions taken by the Commerce Committee to introduce sections of the Highway Bill. I'm particularly pleased that the Railroad Reform, Enhancement, and Efficiency Act, as approved by the Commerce Committee, was included as a title of the bill. Mr. President, these are just a few of the examples of letters that we've received. Final one I'll mention is from Transportation for America. And there again, they say that they appreciate the fact that we are authorizing passenger rail programs with the transportation safety and freight provisions under the jurisdiction of their Commerce Committee through 2021, and that this proposal moves the federal transportation program in the right direction in addressing the nation's freight needs. The point I want to make, Mr. President, is there have been some of our colleagues down here who have been finding fault with various provisions in the bill, and obviously there are going to be a lot of people who aren't going to support this in the end anyway, but we ought to at least be talking about the facts. We ought to be talking about what's actually in the bill, and we ought to be talking about the important reforms that were made in this legislation that addressed safety issues, safety on our highways, safety on our rail system, improvements and reforms in our passenger rail systems and the commuter railroads that we have traveling across this country. There are a number of needed safety improvements and reforms that will be lost if we fail to act. And the letters that I've mentioned are just a few examples of the organizations who rely upon those forms of transportation, who recognize this is an opportunity that we should not miss. And so I hope we will take advantage of the opportunity, not do another short-term extension, which would be the 34th now since 2009, and not put in place the types of changes, reforms, improvements that are needed in our transportation system across this country. If we fail to act now, the window, people think we pass a short-term extension, another 34th short-term extension, we'll be looking at this again sometime later this year, and we'll be right back where we are right now. And so we shouldn't miss this opportunity. You should take advantage of it and try, and as best we can, as we move this across the Senate floor and debate some of these issues, if there are ideas about improving it, making it better, making it stronger, I think that's what this debate here is all about. But I just want to make sure that as we talk about these issues that we are accurately characterizing and reflecting what's actually in the bill and all the work that's been done on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, members that are interested in these issues. There's a number of committees that have jurisdiction over transportation issues. As I mentioned, Commerce Committee is just one. The Environment and Public Works Committee has had the lead on writing the bill. The Finance Committee, on which I also serve, is responsible for, or at least largely responsible for, trying to come up with the pay-fors, the way that we're going to fund this. And the Banking Committee deals with many of the transit provisions in the bill. So there are multiple jurisdictional issues involved here. All those committees have been active. All the members on those committees have been active. I can certainly say that on our committee, on the Commerce Committee, we had great participation from both Democrats and Republicans on the committee, and lots of good input, which didn't end when we reported the bill out of the committee, but continued on through the weekend and into this week. We continue to look at ways that we can make this bill stronger. But I have to say, all the things that are included in here, all the things that I mentioned, along with the other components, the features of this bill that have been worked on by other committees, are important changes, and probably most important in all is that we get something that puts in place a multi-year bill that creates the kind of conditions that are conducive to jobs, to economic growth. We all know how important transportation infrastructure is to our economy. I come from part of the country where we rely heavily. We drive long distances. We have a lot of geography that we have to cover. Our economy, because we're agriculturally based, relies very heavily upon getting our products to the marketplace. And so we've got to have good roads and bridges. We've got to have a railroad system that works. And we believe that many of the things that are done in this bill contribute to that, enhance and make stronger and better and more efficient our transportation system. And that is good for jobs, that is good for the economy in this country, and that's why it's so important, Mr. President, that we move forward.